This is a processing tutorial on focus stacked stitched panoramas as I feature in my fall Gigapixel workshop in Uray, Colorado. At the end of this video you'll find a short clip highlighting how you can get a 10% discount on a Cam Ranger 2 and 10% discount on my fall workshop. Hello friends, John Freeman here. Thought I would do a little bit of a advanced project today here to explain how I did a recent photo I have on Facebook that is a focus stacked panorama photo that I did down in Saguaro National Park here a few weeks ago. Posted it on Facebook and a couple of places, and I've had a couple of people comment on it. Must have been quite a task to do. So I wanted to go through some of the processing I do to prepare for that. I have here on the screen in Adobe Bridge the set of photos I shot at about sunset down in Saguaro National Park on the west side of the Tucson back in I guess it was March 22nd, I believe, or yeah, March 22nd. And I was using my Canon 5D SR, and I was using my EF 70-200 f2.8 lens, and I had chosen a focal length of about 85 millimeters to do this, as shown here. And along with the camera and lens, I was shooting on a Gigapan Epic Pro V to do the panoramic shooting, and I was using a remote control to actually do the focus stacking control of the camera. And for this particular sequence of photos at 85 millimeters, in order to get from the nearest shot to the further shot, I needed to do about 7 individual frames focused at different distances from about 6 feet out to beyond the hyperfocal distance, so that I could have the far horizon also in focus. And altogether we have 126 individual images that are in this set of photos. I'm going to start out by bringing up Camera Raw. I've already processed these prior, but I want to show you the settings I used in Camera Raw. So I'll select the last photo of the set. I'm going to go up here and select, shift click, and select the last one. I'm going to right click now and open with Camera Raw, and this opens up all the files. The way I shot this sequence is I shot the bottom row and then the top row, because at the time of day I was shooting this, my light was starting to fail as far as getting near sunset. So I wanted to get the foreground shot while I still had good light. And you can see here, this is the nearest focused image. And as I go through these, you'll see this group of cactus right here. The thorns on the cactus get a little sharper in the second image, even a little sharper in the third image. And as we go through the sequence here, we'll see that the more distant items become more in focus. And in the last shot here, we see that our horizon is, I guess we got one more, and now that's the last one. The far horizon and the more distant objects are in focus. Now, how I usually do this is I have a set of favorite settings I like to go through to get my dynamic range of my image. And so I'll look at a darker image. This is one of the darker ones of the set. Make sure that I've got no clipping on the bottom end of my histogram, and then I'll look at a brighter image in the moment here to determine if I've got clipping at the high end of the brightest part of the image. And I'll adjust my exposure and my highlights, shadows, and so forth to bring out the maximum dynamic range that I can out of this photo. And because I shoot a Canon and I set the Canon camera to have no adjustment of color, just normal, typically I bump the vibrance and saturation up to about plus 13 or plus 12 on the saturation to bring up some of the color, because the color vibrance is fairly flat with the Canon set to its normal setting. But I do that because I don't want to enhance or blow out the colors in the raw images. These are all raw files I'm working with here. So looking at my histogram up here, my darks, I have no clipping. So I'm going to go down here to one of the last images, which is toward the sunset area, and I want to see what my histogram looks here. And you can see that I've got it set up so I have no clipping on the high end. There's still some dark area in this scene, and partially because this was the last shot of the sequence, the sun had gone behind the clouds a little bit more as I got to this location of the panorama, and so it's fairly dark, but I don't have clipping here with these settings. One other thing I should show you, that whenever I do all these kind of processing, I always go to my lens corrections profile and make sure I have the enable profile corrections and remove chromatic aberrations set for the lens. If I just turn those off briefly, you'll see on the screen, you'll see the distortion of the lens come into play a little bit. Not very much, but typically I always do the lens correction prior to doing any other focus stacking or stitching or anything of my images. Once I get that set, I'm happy with my settings and so forth. I then go ahead and I will go and I'll say select all, and I'll then sync settings to sync all the images to have exactly the same settings for all the parameters I've messed with over here. Once I get those done, then I go down here to the bottom of the screen, I click on Save Images, and then I will select a file to put these in. And because I am putting these in a directory specifically for this, I will go to my photos. I categorize by month and day, and this happens to be my panoramic one, and I will select the TIFF file. I create a file named TIFF and I select that, and so the image save process will now save all the images I'm creating here as TIFF files into that TIFF folder. And so I make sure it's set to TIFF. I like to use for my initial processing either Adobe RGB 1998 or ProPhoto RGB, and make sure it's set to 16-bit channels. I don't do any resizing, I don't do any sharpening. And then I would click on Save to save all these images off to the TIFF file. Since I've already done that, I'm going to cancel this, and I'm just going to say I'm done here, and here's that TIFF file that was created when I processed these previously. So if I open that up, I now see all the various TIFF files that I have generated. So we have 126 individual files here. There are 7 images in each focus stack. So the 126 divided by 7 yields me 18 individual focus stacked images that I'm going to get when it's all done. Go back to my base folder. I also have a subfolder here I call focused, and we'll see that I have here the focus stacked images that I've done, and I've also got other files here that I've stored the final stitched image into, and so you can see that here are my stitched images. And just to give you an idea, I've got a copy of this in here right now, and this is a reduction of the final stitched image, but we can see that we've got nice tack sharp focus on the cacti in the foreground, and yet at the same time the horizon of the image is all nicely focused. So let me close this for now, and I'm going to get out of Bridge for the moment, minimizing it, and I'm going to bring up the Helcon focus stacking software. And Helcon Focus is the program I use to do the actual focus stacking. Several ways you can work with this is that you can open up files here and open images. You can open a stack. There is a batch processing. I don't know if it's a bug with Helcon or if it's a setup problem with my individual computer, but I've not had much luck with the batch process. But I find I like to kind of hand tweak each individual set of images anyway. So at this point I can either go file here, or I can add files right down here. If I click on this, it opens up this window, and so I have it pointing at the TIFF folder of the various images, and I have sized this window such that it includes 7 columns, because there's 7 images in the focus stack. So if I click the first one, shift click the second one, and say open, it now opens those files. We see the 7 files here. If I click this one, we'll see that it's the one that's the far focused. This is the near focused, and as I step through there, you'll see the focusing get further and further and further away as the focus sequence has been taken with the camera. There are several different rendering methods that you can use within Helcon Focus to allow you to get optimized focus stacking. I tend to use either method B or method C. In method B, I usually use a very small radius, especially on an image like this, where there's a lot of detail around the thorns of the cacti and stuff like that. And also on the smoothing, I tend to use that. As I was processing these saguaro photographs, I've kind of decided that method C tended to be a little bit better as far as getting good focus stacking. And then the smoothing I set to a very small number again to try to retain the detail of the thorns on the cacti. So at this point I've got all 7 images selected. I click on render, and at this point Helcon takes off and starts doing its work, and you'll see it processing through here, finding the various distances and the images that are best focus stacked. And so now we have a side-by-side comparison, and I can look at the first image up here. This is my foreground. Here's my next step, third step. And it looks like the third step is probably the one that has some of the best focusing for these thorns in this area. If I'm not happy with how this looks over here in the stacked image. I have the option to do some retouching. So if I click on the next tab up here, I can then start doing some retouching. And we have a brush, and we can adjust that brush size. And you notice that inside that brush right now, as I'm moving that brush, because I'm have the first image of this focus sequence selected, it inside the brush shows me an unfocused area. Obviously I don't want to use that first image for that area out there further from the camera. And even here closer, we see that that image was really, that first step in the sequence was even too close for that. And we saw earlier that the third image was actually the one that seemed to give us the best tack sharpness on these needles down here. So you can go down through here and you can retouch on this. You can adjust the size of your brush down to much smaller. You can roll your mouse and actually zoom in, and you can start retouching these areas and getting just that cactus portion. Notice if out here, if I get in this area, that is taking the wrong image for that portion of the image. I need to find the one that's the best in focus for that, which is obviously the second to the last one. And I can go in here and retouch that. Also in this area right here, we see that we've got some of that going on. I can adjust my brush size down a little bit smaller, give me the ability to come in here and fine-tune all of this area down in here. And this can get quite tedious in the detail of going through a photo like this. But you can go through and you can touch all this up, and it's just a matter of preference of how much detail you want to try to get in there. And in some of these, it will be a fairly tedious task to get all the fine detail touched up. In this area here, you can see that I need to touch it up a little bit, and so forth, and get this here. Of course, I just killed that thorn, and I could go back, pick up my one that's got the really good detail of that thorn and make my brush very small, and I could come in here and pick him up again, I believe. Yeah, there he is. And then go back to this one. This zoom is a little bit flaky. If you roll your mouse, you need to position your cursor right close to where you want to be working. And then I can go in here and touch up this area right in here, doing my best to avoid that thorn if I want to retain that detail in there. So hit this area right in here and just paint that in there, much like you do anytime you're painting on and retouching on any Photoshop project. So that gives you a flavor for how you can use this Helcon focus to really fine-tune and get really nice looking focus stacked areas in your image. I'm not going to go through a lot of this right now because it's just so tedious for the video. A couple things is you've got a brush hardness here, very similar to the brush in Photoshop. So if your brush is a little bit larger and you're out here on the perimeters, it doesn't affect at the edge of the brush very much. And so I tend to keep that hardness up a little higher so that I can get some clarity in there and know where my brush is at. There's a show depth map, and this allows you to see areas where you're doing your retouching. In some cases you'll notice that you didn't cover all the area that you might want to cover. So as we're in this area right in here, the black area represents, I believe it's this one. The black area is the third photo, and so if I was to go in here and paint this area here, it'll turn it black, which selects the third photo. If I go back here, select the next to the last one, I get the right information. But it helps you see where you've actually retouched and stuff, and like this needle that we're wanting to retain sets right in this area of this thing, and then you can see, okay, I can actually retouch all this area up here and eliminate the out of focus area from the third image, selecting the sixth image as the area that I want. So when that all turns white like this, we know that we've got most of the sixth image involved in that area there. So we're able to see in a little bit more clarity what we've retouched there. There's a show the source map, and so that's also just showing me in black the area that's coming from the third photo, while it leaves the original of this photo, the sixth photo, shown on the screen. And then you can turn that off and show texture only, and that is a cloning process to preserve the original brightness of the levels and stuff. And I have not used this at all. You got a couple of undos and redos here. Another option you've got up here is you can do some text addition. I don't use this because I'm using this to create panoramas. I don't want to put any text in here. Once I'm happy with my retouching, and I'm looking at my rendered information here, and I'm happy with this, I'm ready to save that particular file. I can go up here and say saving, and I can save, and unfortunately it doesn't always remember where you put stuff. You sometimes have to, at least for the initial try, you have to go back in and find where that is going to be stored. And I'm going to be going into the focused, and I use a numbering sequence to basically show me where I'm at. And you'll note that I'm actually working on this image. Whenever I got ready to stitch this the first time, I realized that the stitching software wants to have the files numbered in sequence as where they set in the image, and I wanted to do top row, second row. So when I started renumbering these and saving them, I said this is going to be my number 10 image, because I have 9 images on the top row and 9 images on the second row. So I said this is going to, I gave it TIF7_10 as the file name, so that the stitching software knew that this was going to be the 10th image of the sequence. And when I show you how to stitch this in a few minutes, you'll see how that works. So in this case, I can just double click this, I can overwrite it, or I can just give it a name, and it saves the file. So once I've saved that file, I go back to my retouching, and here I can say I want to remove all images. So I'm going to say I'm going to remove all these 7 images from my stacking. Now I'm going to add a new set, and so I could go to the next group here and use those and stack them and so forth. I want to go to one of the ones that's on the top horizon, and it's going to take my computer a few moments here to find those files. Actually process the thumbnails is what it's doing. because this is a 50 megapixel camera, and when you convert these to TIFFs, they create 256 megabyte files. It bogs the computer to a certain extent when it starts to open these TIFF files. So it takes a fairly powerful computer to do this kind of stuff. This computer I'm using is a hex core machine, 6800 i7 processor. I have 128 gigabytes of memory in the computer and many terabytes of hard drives. This particular hard drive is a 4 terabyte drive that I'm just using for my 2020 photos right now. It's almost empty. So I'm going to select the first photo in the top row sequence. So there's 7 images that makes up that focus stack. So I select the first one, shift click on the 7th one, and click on open. And so now I have that set of images. So one of the things I've noticed is I want to show you something here that is a phenomena with my particular Canon 70 to 200 millimeter lens. As I click on the first image here, which is the nearest focused image, notice the borders of the image versus the last image. We have more information along the borders, and as I go through these, it's going to look like I'm zooming in a little bit as this gets tighter and tighter and tighter on the image. We've lost some information out here on the edges. This is a phenomena of a lens known as focus breathing. Even though I didn't change my focal length, it's all at the same focal length on all of these. What happens is the field of view narrows as you focus nearer and nearer. This can become a problem when you get ready to stitch the image. I ran into it on another shot that I did in Saguaro, where one of the cacti was very near the top of the image when I framed my image. And when I went to the nearest focused one, it clipped off in the first 2 or 3 values of the near focused positions. It clipped the top of the cacti off. And what I ended up having to do to get the focus stacking to work, since it's high on the horizon, the vast majority of the information that I'm interested in is contained in the last 2 or 3 images. So I was able to deselect the first images, and by deselecting those images I was able to retain the top of that cacti at the top of the image. And in fact, in this one I can see that I only need at best the last 2, and so I will deselect everything except the last 2. I'll do my render, let it go through the process, and you can see that I've lost this cactus right here at the very edge. You can see his arm, but his main center part is missing on the image. Quite frankly, I could deselect this one and re-render, and it doesn't even want to do it because of the fact that it needs to have at least 2 in the stack. The other option would be to stitch this image with using only the far focused image from the set. But I've got enough overlap here that cactus, the vertical part of that vertical part of that cactus, is going to be in the next image of the panorama, far enough in that it's going to easily be able to stitch that. So I would just say go ahead and use this. Now I want to look at the retouching here, and I want to turn on the depth map. And so this image is the black. If I turn on my brush here, if I go up here and select the last image of the focus stack, start painting, notice that whole sky area is going to turn white. Interestingly, the hook-on focus, whenever you're dealing with a area of sky like this that hasn't got much detail in it, it tends to have a little trouble determining which focus image it needs to use, whether it's the first one or the second of this two focus set. Another thing you'll notice is up here in this area of the sky, there's some kind of ghost images. Notice how the clouds were moving actually a fairly amount while this focus stacking was going on, and so you end up with some ghosting of the clouds. And especially in areas where the clouds have got a lot of detail in them, it's a good idea to go ahead and select the furthest focused image of the group, and then just come in here and paint in that whole area, and notice that those ghosts are going away. We're no longer getting the ghosting of the clouds, and we're getting a lot better representation of what was going on in that area. And I will warn you that this painting like this in a large area of the image takes some computing horsepower. So if you're trying to do this on a laptop with 12 gig of memory or something like that, you're probably going to find the process is somewhat slow. If you're really into nitpicking and so forth, you can get down into this area here and really begin to fine-tune that area. You can reduce the brush size, and then you could go down in here and clean up in between all these individual cacti. But frankly, it's not really all that necessary, especially in this area of smooth sky. A little bit of blending is actually maybe good. So I'll go ahead, and I'm happy with that. I'll go up here, I'll say save, and so that's this first image right here. Save it. I'm going to resave it right now. So that gives you a flavor for what the Helcon Focus is capable of. I think from here we're gonna switch over to the stitching process. And so I'm going to minimize Helcon Focus. I'm going to bring back up Bridge, and we want to just take a look at a couple of these. These are the various images that we're dealing with that are going to be stitched. I'm going to shift click on these, and we can see that we've got our set. I want to find that one. Yeah, I believe this is the one that had that cacti that we were having trouble finding the edge of. So I use two different sets of stitching programs to do this kind of work. I have been using the Color Auto Panel Giga since 2011 for doing this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, in 2018, GoPro bought Auto Panel Giga, or the Color company, and GoPro immediately discontinued and shut down the Color operation, and Color is no longer available to be purchased. I still have an archived version of it, and I use it quite a bit because I know it works well for me, and frankly I find that it works better in many cases. There's also PT GUI that you can do the same thing with, but I find I'm still learning PT GUI, and I've found some idiosyncrasies of it that has caused me to have some problems, and specifically on one of these Seguro panoramas I did, I found that when it tried to align and match up a couple of the Seguro cactus, the stitching line went right through the middle of the cactus, ended up with incongruent lines through the cactus so that you could see very obviously where the stitching occurred. I stitched the same exact set of images with AutoPanel Giga, and it did a fine job with no problem. I'm going to launch AutoPanel Giga here. Okay, we have AutoPanel Giga loaded now, and for this particular set of photos, you have several options with AutoPanel, and the same with PT GUI. You can either open a folder with the images. You can select specific images from within a folder, and both AutoPanel and PT GUI have the ability to import as in rows and columns. I'm actually going to select the files, so I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to the second. Okay, now I'm in my panel 1 focus group, so I'm going to select my images. I've got a Photoshop file there, so I'm going to do a shift click to select those first ones, and I'm going to do a control click to select the remaining images of the set. And I'm not using the rows column format. I'm actually just selecting the files, and I'm going to let AutoPanel Giga figure out on its own how these images align. So I'll click on detect here, and it's going to go off and do some key point matching on these images and how they align. In just a few seconds here, does the final optimization. And so there is the initial stitched image. I'm going to go in here and edit. Obviously we've got a little bit of tilt in this thing, and the first thing I'm going to do is level this a little bit. Our stitching quality is extremely good, so that means that we've got a high potential of getting a very successful stitch. I'm going to use the roll a little bit to level this just a touch. I'll do this a couple, 3, 4, 5 times until I get my horizon pretty well leveled with this. I also am looking at the bottom edge and top edge here, and we can see that we've got everything pretty well leveled. At that point, I'm going to do a crop to crop to the area of the image that is actually useful, and it shows me in the yellow here where it's going to do a crop. I click the check mark. There it is. It's cropped. At this point, you can do some correction if you need to. If you've shot this all with the same manual settings as far as shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, typically you won't have to make any adjustments. You do have the ability here to do some auto color modes and stuff. I'm not going to cover this very much because this AutoPanel Giga, being an obsolete program, is of little use. At that point, I can go here, I can click on this gear, and this is the parameters that I can set to do the stitching and creation of the final file. I'm going to create an Adobe Photoshop file, 16-bit. The image is going to be 51 inches by 129 inches, about 600 megapixels. And I would just click on render here, it would go off and think about it for a few minutes and save a final file under this file name, and it would be ready to pull into Photoshop for final processing. I'm going to just cancel out of this since I've already done this one, and we'll close Auto Panel and just go back to the bridge file. And so this, I believe, let me find it here. Here is the final stitched image when I stitched it before. I open that in Photoshop, and Photoshop is going to read that large document format file, and you can see that it takes it a few moments to read that file from being a 600 megabit file. Now it's actually pulling it into the memory of the computer, and here's our stitched image. I'm going to close this JPEG here that I had open earlier, and click on full screen. We now see, as we pan through this thing, we can see that everything from foreground to horizon is nicely focused, from the very forward closest cacti right here in the very foreground out to the distance cactus out here. This old guy out here kind of pointing us over toward that mountain and saying, hey, look over there. He's well focused. And if we look in the far background back there, you can see some buildings and some industrial stuff going back there in the valley below Squirrel National Park. And as we get over here toward the actual sunset area, those mountains are nicely focused too. And so that is pretty much what I did to create this this image. We've got some of the cactus just starting to bloom here, the saguaro needles. They're pretty nicely focused. And notice this scale is 1 inch. So we're looking at this pretty much 1-to-1 right now on this screen. And we've got nice detail of the cacti and nice detail in the distance area here. So that's how I did it. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks. Hi folks, just as a follow-up here, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial video there on how I do these focus stacked panoramic images. I just wanted to put a plug in for my 2020 Gigapixel panoramic photography workshop that we've got scheduled for September 25th to 27th for the 3D basics, and then September 28th for HDR panoramas, and September 29th for night panoramas. We're restarting this workshop. I haven't had it for a couple of years because the promo control company that I used to do that sequence with has gone out of business. I recently have created or gotten in partnership with CamRanger, and CamRanger is in the process of putting together a focus stacking capability for the CamRanger that enhances their already available focus stacking capability that takes advantage of creating repeatable focus stacks that's required as part of doing these large panoramas. And just as a little bit more of a plug, we've got an early bird special. You get a 10% discount off the workshop tuition if you register before August 15th, and we can also offer you a coupon if you purchase a CamRanger 2 to get a 10% discount. And so that's the promotion. A little bit of what you'll learn. Down here you'll find out that you're going to find about nodal points, how you need to set your camera to get consistent needed perfect panorama images, time of day, framing, composition, optimizing exposure settings, keeping everything in focus. We'll look at both non-focus stacked and focus stacked capabilities, and then we'll be reviewing the stitching programs, and how to assure the highest quality images. And then we'll do some Photoshop processing. And then for the optional day 4, we've got HDR panoramas, and the day 5 night photography. Go to the web page, my web page, Obvious Creations Photography. Look for the Gigarama workshops, drop down and select the 2020 panoramic photography. Have a great day. Bye.